Well, I've already set the tone for what we're going to try and do over the next 90 minutes, and let me invite the panel to join me. So we do have some people to talk to you. I do want to see this as conversational. I'd like to hear your ideas as well. Let me remind you, this is about the year of migration, what European response. And I'm going to repeat what I said right at the beginning, and others said as well. 2 days ago now, we were not talking about migration this time a year ago, yet the evidence was there that something awful was about to challenge Europe, maybe not on the scale, but certainly the level and the direction of travel of the crisis that was about to hit. But now we want to look forward. We are where we are. We saw the Pope in Lesbos yesterday saying this is the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. We've heard other remarks as well. We'll hear them today as well. And we saw what the Pope did, taking 12 Syrian refugees back to the Vatican with him yesterday. So this is a very serious challenge. It could be seen as an existential challenge for the European Union for so many reasons over the coming, not years, but days and months. Let me ask you to use your app. Let me ask you to use that for comments. I also want to put a vote, an idea to you for you to vote on. And after the video, which we're now going to show you, it's only a minute and a half, I'd like you to come up with ideas of what we need to be talking about. So many of you come from so many countries which are affected by this. We need to hear your ideas as well. Let me just, though, introduce the panel. We have the President of Croatia, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović. Welcome. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
We have František Šebej, who is Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee here in Slovakia. Welcome. We have Angeliki Dimitriadi, who is a research fellow at the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy in Athens. She's been working in Berlin for the last few months at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome. And Roland Freudenstein, who is currently Deputy Director and Head of Research at the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies in Brussels, formerly at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Welcome, Roland. They've got ideas, you've got ideas. Let me remind you of what we've been going through and where we are at the moment on the refugee migration crisis. Make or break year for the European Union. Ideas from you first, please. Who'd like to come in with some thoughts of what we should be talking about? Microphone here. Anyone else, please? I gave you notice before coffee and there as well. Okay. Be brief. Okay.
Alan Riley, Atlantic Council. If Jean Monnet was alive today, he will be saying very simply this to Europe. We deploy our strategic European power to deal with this problem. Let me give you one simple example, one very simple. Our greatest strategic power is the single market. What we should be doing with Jordan, Tunisia and Egypt is providing each of those states with a series of enterprises.
All right, Alan, that's long enough. No. You put it on the agenda. I just wanted...
With free movement of goods, service and capital to each of those enterprise zones, so they're attractive. We're able to do a deal with those states, so they take the refugees. The refugees and the locals get tremendous amounts of economic advantage. You increase the tax bases of those states. You increase their stability,
Alan,
and you create a substantial degree of cooperation between those states.
Alan,
That's the sort of approach we require.
I'm going to be pretty tough on this because I did say brief, please. Ideas. And there as well.
Yes, Barry Alamuddin, I just want to check with each and every one of you to go to your heart and mind and think of this issue of refugees as something that's going to define us and our morality and our humanity for a very long time. Thank you.
Right, and the lady there, please. Anyone else?
Neelam Dev, I wanted to just say that, you know, the Pope has engaged in some very compassionate statements and actions with reference to the refugees, but is bringing religion in as an overtone and an undertone into the question of refugees going to be positive?
Thank you very much indeed. Anyone else? It's your chance at the moment, the lady at the front. Just tell me, where are you? Because I'll get the microphones to you quickly, then we can move to the panel. There's a lady here and a lady here. Please.
Ibtisam Al-Kitbi from UAE. If the doors are closed in front of the refugees, they will be turned to a terrorist because no hope, the only door will be open for them is ISIS.
Thank you very much indeed. And the lady behind you. Thanks. Anyone else want to come in quickly? The gentleman there, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. You said, will this...
You're from Romania.
I'm chairing the European Affairs Committee in the Romanian Parliament, Deputy Chamber, Ana Borcel. You said will be the make or the break of Europe. Will the refugee crisis be left just on the European Union shoulders, Europe's shoulder, or actually should be more seen as an international crisis and therefore everybody should step in and actually bear the burden? Thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman there.
Yes, my name is Emilio Perez. I'm from Spain. My concern is leadership and Turkey. Turkey, when Angela Merkel went to Turkey some months ago, we are helping Turkey, giving them money. They asked for 3 times the amount. We have to have a good relationship with Turkey, but it has to be balanced, and we want a loyal partner. And my question is, are they a loyal partner?
Thank you very much indeed. Gentleman here, and then the last over there.
Western Balkans route, is it closed? And what is the role of the Visegrad 4 in this route? Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Jonathan Isle from Rusi in London.
My question is, do you believe that we should reinterpret the Refugees Convention, that we should reinterpret the international legal instruments that we have in defining refugees and in treating the refugee problem?
So what we've done there is we've put 1 or 2 ideas on the agenda. I'm going to come back to you later, but for which I would like you to begin addressing from the panel. Madam President, can I just remind you that you and I last met at the Bled Forum in Slovenia at the end of August when this was all beginning to become a serious problem. What's gone wrong with leadership? Because I looked at those of you on the panel, including Mr. Tusk, and there's that sense of this isn't going to be a major problem, surely, is it?
If you remember, Nick, at the time, I tried to be very diplomatic in what I said, but I nevertheless wanted to warn the European Union and everybody else that this is a long-term issue, that we were distracted just by quibbling on the quota system for the 1.2 million people who are now on the EU soil. We are being retroactive. We're dealing with the effects of the crisis. What about the sources? A few people mentioned today here the plight of the refugees. As we're talking this morning, please let us think of not only those who should be relocated in Europe. Let's think of all those people who are dying in Syria right now and in other places of the world, whether it be from war, hunger, terrorism, etc. The migration crisis, the title of the panel should not be the year of migration, but the years of migrations. This will be a long-term issue. The UNHCR estimates that it's 50 to 60 million people who are on the move worldwide. And obviously, this is not just Europe's problem. This is a global problem where, of course, we have to be a lot more assertive, a lot more unified in our action and in our declarations, in our rhetoric as well, and be united in solidarity and in European values here in the European Union, but also work globally.
The long-term hit very quickly after we last met in Bled, within literally days and weeks. It didn't take years.
Exactly.
It took weeks.
And
how well do you think leadership is handling this at the moment?
Not very well right now. I think we're just trying to focus on the long-term issues and address the root causes of the migrations and not just the effects. And to tell you honestly, as we were either priding ourselves for letting refugees go through our territory or for registering the refugees, we were nevertheless, again, disguising or hiding our disinterest for what's going on in Syria and in other countries, the real plight of the people who are there, who are dying of hunger, disease, not only bombs and bullets. So it's our responsibility to work within the 3D aspects. First, diplomacy, diplomatic efforts, and working together in the European Union and with the third countries. Defend ISIL. Somebody said, let's not leave these people to ISIL. But let's not ethnically cleanse Syria either. Let's not leave the ground empty for ISIL. Let's help Syria stand on its feet and start rebuilding. And the people who will be rebuilding Syria are the refugees, and most of them are currently in the neighboring countries because this is where mostly refugees stay. And third, development aid, development effort, in order to address these root causes. And let's work with the United Nations and let us finally start implementing the Sustainable Development Goals to address illiteracy, poverty, inequality, religious extremism, terrorism, and everything else, including climate change that leads to these migrations.
Angeliki, what I'm trying to do is get an audit from all four of you about where we are at the moment before we can start moving ahead. And please bear in mind everything we've just heard already from the delegates here. Angeliki, your job is to analyze all of this, particularly the impact on asylum policies and so on. What's your audit of where we've got to in the last very difficult months?
Well, I think it's interesting that we're using the term crisis. For me, this was never a refugee crisis for Europe. It's definitely a refugee crisis in Syria. There's a refugee crisis in Afghanistan, in Yemen, and in other places around the world. In Europe, this is a management crisis. And the situation has proved that there are deep divisions among member states. We have not succeeded in setting up a system from the beginning that would be able to be flexible and address changes in the migratory flows. And we ended up in the situation we ended up in 2015. So I think there is poor leadership. I do agree with Madam President, we have to address the root causes, but this is a long-term strategy. In the short term, we also have to look into ways of, firstly, integrating and giving protection to the 1 million refugees that are right now in Europe. And secondly, we also need to acknowledge that it is not fair for the Europeans to continually try to outsource the management, both of irregular migration and of the refugee issues, to the neighboring countries and beyond. It's not just enough to talk about sustainable development and giving money. We also have to take our fair share, which means we have to sit down around a table and agree how we're going to do it.
What's your assessment of the political capacity now to handle the enormity? Is there a realization among the political class of what lies ahead?
I think there is a realization, but I also think that they're trying still to outsource the problem and the solution to somebody else. I think they're hesitant to undertake the big leap. It is a leap of faith. It will cost politically to leaders to stand up before their public and public opinion and say, we have to now do this, and there will be short-term effects in all of these countries, but in the long run, we can benefit from this. It takes political leadership and courage.
But let me just press you. Are you saying there's almost willful blindness? Are you saying there's almost denial about the scale of this and where it's likely to lead next?
I don't think there is denial about the scale of this. I think there is denial about acting as they should on this. It's a difference.
Roland.
Well, giving protection is one thing. Integrating them in EU member states is a different thing, I would say. And this is one big misunderstanding about the meaning of Geneva, of the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention commits us to give protection to them. That does not mean that they can freely choose their place of residence, and it does not mean that we can even remotely try to give a home to and integrate the 60 million that are currently on the road, so to speak, as refugees from war and failing states, and the hundreds of millions that will follow in the next couple of years. This was a situation that was not foreseen by the mothers and fathers of the Geneva Convention, and I think we'd better be honest with ourselves and the rest of the world in saying that, hey, let's sit together and think how we can solve this, but let's keep these two things apart. Giving protection, yes, there is a commitment. And just one more remark to the lady from UAE. You're certainly not representative of your government, but I do wonder why the neighboring countries of Syria, and I don't mean Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon, I mean the other neighbors of Syria, have taken in so comparatively few refugees from that country. That's a question that is really bothering many European citizens.
Roland, let me just press you, like I did with Angeliki, about the scale of what lies ahead. The IOM, the UNHCR, did warn about what was likely to happen. Others did behind closed doors, but the political class didn't grip it. What about what lies ahead, not in a few years, but literally a few weeks and months down the track? Roland.
Look, it stands and falls with the Turkey deal, right? And that deal, there's a lot to be said about it. It was a stopgap after stopgap after stopgap, temporary solution. You know, we're stumbling forward. And, you know, there's numerous risks. But I'm afraid that, well, next to closing the so-called Western Balkan route, that was the only thing that looked feasible at the moment, and no one has an alternative to it. So, no, just one more sentence. What is the Turkey deal? It's basically helping Turkey to deal with a very, very high number of migrants in its country before they even go to the European Union.
František, Šebej, let me come to you here in Slovakia. We are within sight of, I think, something like 60 Syrians who are living in containers just on the Austrian side of the border at Berg. Literally, you can see it across the Danube. What is your view here? You're at a pivotal point, a pivotal location.
Actually, we are not a pivotal point. We are somehow...
You are in the geography of the area.
Yes, but actually not too many refugees actually have ambitions to come here. And those 60 people who are living just close to our border, at the border, they are free to walk over, and they do. I can meet them having a walk on the riverside, a few minutes from the place where I live. And obviously, this is not they do not represent the problem we are facing. And what I'm worried about is actually that politicians in my country, and not only my country, simply choose to use the refugee crisis to improve their electability by instigating fear, by creating a feeling of a threat, which is, from my point of view, absolutely irresponsible, because somehow from public discourse in my country and in some neighboring countries vanished the very basic feeling of human solidarity. Mostly it was only about the threat, and the pictures shown in television, because you don't see many refugees here around, almost none. But the pictures shown in television channels were used to create a sense of being threatened, and it became an agenda in debate before elections, and unfortunately, it was used successfully. So the refugee crisis is not only a crisis of those people who were forced to leave their homes to save their lives and so on, but it's also a value crisis in
right. Well, let me pick up that, if I may, the value crisis and the fear. And by the way, please do use this as well to get thoughts to me as the panelists are speaking. Let me just pick up that, Madam President.
Yes. I wanted to come in, Nik, because Croatia is on the so-called Western Balkans route, which is now being closed, that it will remain closed until further notice. And I have some personal experience in terms of having visited the refugees, the migrants on the ground in Croatia, and most recently the Wednesday of this past week in Macedonia. So the way that we handle the crisis, the way that we handle the refugee flows or the migrant flows, last year really resulted in so many problems. One is the overall problem of the erosion of values that was mentioned, most notably solidarity, which goes both ways or multiple ways in this aspect. Secondly, there came out fear in many countries, fear of the unknown, of what the refugees, what the migrants were bringing with them. In Croatia, we have a very stable Islamic community. We will celebrate on the 27th of this month 100 years of Islam being an official religion, one of the official religions in Croatia. We've never had problems with our Islamic community, with our Muslim community. It really is an exemplary community that deals with the potential radicalization within their own ranks, and they isolate any potential extremists. And for them, the stability of the situation that they find themselves in is crucial to maintain the stability of the whole Muslim community and, of course, of the whole of Croatia. Now, speaking to migrants that are stuck in Jevgelija or in Domini, you see that they are completely confused, because in the beginning they felt welcome, they felt that they were being invited, and suddenly we have stopped the route, and they don't know what's going to happen. So we owe them answers. They cannot continue as such. You have children there who are not going to school. We'll have a lost generation of children, not just in Syria, but in other parts of Europe. And in refugee centers, I don't like calling them camps, but centers or reception centers, where children just do not get proper education, which is a huge problem as well. But then there is confusion of what Europe is going to do, and the corruption of the migrant flow from within, because we were not determining in the very beginning who has the right to asylum. It's people who are in need of international protection. But within that migration wave, we've seen a lot of economic migrants. And as we know, every single country has the right to decide how many economic migrants they will or will not take in. So until we make this policy very clear, in the short term, the migrants will continue to be confused. There will be other migrants coming to our shores in hopes that they will get to mostly Western European destinations. As for instance, we've had about 700,000 people pass through Croatia, 150 individuals asked for asylum last year, about 274 altogether since September of last year. So clearly, they all want to go to Germany or Sweden or some other countries who offer other benefits.
Let me ask you, because what I'd like to do is engage others as well who've got other experiences in other countries, but just picking up with every one of you on the panel about the limiters that are being created by values and fears. You've been through it in Croatia. You've had to take emotional decisions, you've had to take political decisions and practical decisions as well. What are you learning now about the limiters on political leadership to handle this, given that every leader has national pressures, whichever country they're in, quickly, and then I'll move along to the other.
Well, absolutely, yes, we did have disagreement in Croatia, but it was not nearly as big as it was in some other countries. I guess because of that, the lack of the fear of the unknown, as we have dealt with refugees before and with migrants. So, and the Croatian society was actually very open. The people of Croatia, there was very little xenophobic or rightist political reaction to the migrants. So we're one of the few countries where really these migrant flows are not producing far-right parties to be on the rise.
Right, Angeliki, what's your view about the way emotion, fear, values and so on is now limiting political options?
Well, to start with, in Greece, for example, this is a no factor. The people have been extremely welcoming, and I would say we have a similar experience. We do not see far-right movement, at least an increase in Greece in relation to the refugee flows. But overall across Europe, of course, the discussion is happening on values and fear, and there is a direct link now with a broader insecurity produced from the events in Cologne, Brussels and Paris. And that's very evident. The discussion around the imposition of national border controls in the Schengen was linked directly with the passing of the two alleged terrorists, for example, from the Greek islands and the famous passport incident. So there is now a direct link between these two. In my view, it's a faulty link, but it exists nonetheless. But if you give me half a minute, I want to get back to what you said about the 1951 Convention and integration. You're right, the Convention does not say anywhere that when the refugees are awarded protection, any form of protection, they have to be integrated into the society. This is a choice that national governments have to make. But on the other hand, if we do not choose to integrate them, it's almost as if we assume that the refugee status is indeed a temporary one. It may be a temporary one, but it might end up being a prolonged situation. Integration can benefit the receiving society as well as the refugee or holder of any form of international protection. There can be a beneficial relationship between these two, so why not try to link this to international legislations a little bit more? Wouldn't it help
Roland.
us?
Yeah, but look, I was a little bit taken aback by your word outsourcing. You know, the thing is protecting the lives of refugees from war zones and collapsed states is our obligation, but that does not mean that they can choose their country of residence. That may mean that the EU and its member states support facilities in the neighboring countries of that failing state.
And why is it the responsibility of the other country to take the refugees and not also of the EU? Why is it always somebody else's responsibility and never also ours?
Angeliki, my dear, Germany has taken in...
No, Germany has. I agree with you.
has taken in 1 million people last
Yes.
year. And when I'm not against integration. I know we need more people actually in the long run, which is one of the big errors of the hardcore opposition to the German policy. But I think that we need to see the challenges involved in integrating people. And you go to Paris, look in the banlieue. I live in Brussels, 5 metro stations from Molenbeek. You know, I used to have lunch there quite a few times. And you see that integration has not fully worked in Europe. There are success stories.
All right, Roland,
let
me come back on that point raised by František about values and fear, and also raised with the President as well, about how that is now becoming a limiter on political options in every country.
It certainly is. And as I said before, this open-ended Richter scale of the numbers that may come in creates an open-ended Richter scale of fears. And I think that's a completely normal reaction. It's whether we like it or not, it's a fact, and it is changing the landscapes of political parties. Yeah, you know, I'm the first to admit that, yes, Germany has a kind of far right, which was created in the times of the Euro crisis, and which is now thriving on the migration crisis. Far right may be a relative term in this context. You know, I mean, our far right would probably be considered moderate in some other member states of the EU, but it's a fact that this is driven by fears of parallel societies, of which we already see examples in some European countries, and we don't want more of those.
Open-ended Richter scale of fear. Let me come to you and ask, we're looking for solutions here. Let's not all go away totally depressed. If anyone's got ideas about how to take it forward, which can overcome fear and also in some way mitigate perceptions, let's hear those ideas and take them forward from here in Bratislava. An idea, I'm coming to you in a moment, František, an idea of just what's on people's minds. Why is Europe trying to shelter illegal immigrants who represent a potential security risk? That seems, from someone here, to be ventilating the kind of fears and perception problems here. František, just picking up on the way the discussion's going.
Well, there are more than two sides to this coin.
Inevitably.
What I want to say is that linked to that fear and value crisis, the very fact that Europe is facing a huge tide of people trying to save their lives and migrants who are moving for other reasons is simply used by some forces in Europe, and Europe, because of the refugee crisis, is actually changing politically. The political landscape of Europe is changing. 5 years ago, in my country, we couldn't imagine the outcome of elections we got now. Simply the emotions like fear, like xenophobia, like hatred, for example, could be used as a kind of political agenda and political glue to put together political forces and parties which are changing the environment and changing for the worse.
Well, what we want to do here, though, in the next hour, is somehow find a bridge between these kind of perceptions and fears, this kind of claustrophobia which is now coming in, and the very real humanitarian challenge.
Well, fortunately, the public, at least in this country, reacted much better than the larger part of political elite. Actually, the huge number of people simply reacted with solidarity, tried to collect not only money, but traveled over and tried to take care of refugees directly on the border. But unfortunately, the political class, part of it, misused the situation to improve their electability, and now we are facing the results of this. So.
All right, some of you may think we're overstating this, or do you think we're understating it? Let me get your thoughts, but can I ask you to go on your GLOBSEC app for a moment, because I want to put to you a question. Go on your GLOBSEC app, because we're going to put a question up here. A question we actually put in the City Talks yesterday across town, and it's the same question: should the EU reimpose internal border controls to deal with the migrant crisis? I'd like to know what you're thinking at the moment. Then I'm going to come back later and ask you if you've changed your mind at all. So please vote on this. Yes, they should reimpose. No, they shouldn't. Or you are undecided at this point. This is just emblematic of the kind of challenges for the politicians. Do we get a result, Tony? There it is. Okay, no. Right, that's what you think. 2/3 of you think that that's not a good idea. I'll come back to you later and see if any of you have changed your mind. But the other thing is only 6% of you were undecided. Yesterday there were many more who were undecided in the City Talks. Does anyone want to come in on this issue of perception and fears to help inform this discussion? Konstantin von Egert from Russia. Anyone else, please? On this particular issue only of perception, fears and values and the challenge for politicians. Quickly, Konstantin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't live in the European Union, and that's why I want to introduce a bit of sacrilege here. Actually, Russia, my country, has accepted about 20 million migrants from mostly Central Asia and South Caucasus in the last 20 years. And there are problems, but they're not comparable to what happens in Europe. It's a different context, of course, but my question is, if you look at the Russian experience, these people that came into Russia, it's a bit like illegal migrants in New Mexico, lots of corruption, black schemes, stuff like that. In the end, a lot of them adapted because they had to work. My question is whether actually there is a very stark choice between the old European welfare state model and integration of migrants. Once you have to learn a job and do stuff, you have smaller time to watch ISIS snuff videos on welfare.
All right, let's pick up that point, please.
I think that the big question is to what extent those politicians who play this migrant game fear really, or whether they use it as a kind of engineering tool in order to gather support among its populations. So, and I think this is also a very central question: to what extent we do have to do with real fears, and to what extent it's about political engineering. And we know that the political engineering can be very dangerous.
Let me keep pressing you on perception and fears and values and the dilemmas for the politicians.
Yes, I think it's very important to realize that refugees are not terrorists. Most of the people that have done the terrorism in Europe are citizens of Europe. They've been here, they've been born here. So this is really important.
But the dilemma for politicians.
The dilemma is to tell the truth to their people and not to use the refugees as tool, to be brave enough to face the reality. Try to find a solution for the problem in Syria and then go on from there.
Right, two more, please.
Tamás Pesut, Corvinus University of Budapest, Hungary. Madam President, can the European politicians...
I want your view on this, though, about perception and fears. That's all I'm asking. I'm asking for your view. coming from Hungary.
My view is on the European leaders, whether they have the ability to distinguish between solidarity and charity.
What would you say about your country and your Prime Minister and the way Hungary is handling this?
I'm not a European leader.
Perception, fear and values. Jonathan Isle and then one more here.
I think it's a fallacy to believe that what we're witnessing here is just a group of European leaders cynically manipulating a situation, and that the public is inherently on the side of immigrants, and it's only some cynical leaders who are against it. In the case of the UK, which is the one I know best, it was exactly the opposite. We were one of the first countries to open to the new member states of the European Union. We probably ended up with 1.5 million people that moved to the UK from other European Union countries. There was very little problem and there was very little backlash, and the leadership was for it, actually. Exactly the opposite from what you accuse other leaders.
But we've now seen a significant movement.
Exactly. The problem now is that we have is that immigration is the number one issue in the UK, and if Brexit takes place, it will be because of that.
So what's your view on perception, value and fears then, Jonathan?
My view is, sadly, that there is limited opportunities for people to educate the electorate, and educating the electorate at every stage is a fool's game.
So a real challenge for politicians. One more, please, and then here.
Thank you. My name is Adrian Newman from the Institute for Security Policy in Kiel, and I believe there's a big problem of perception among the young people. So we come out of austerity, and we've got many young people unemployed, let's say in Spain, in Greece, and in France, and they do not understand, and politicians have poorly explained why now supposedly bringing in people who are, for our highly developed economy, rather bad educated, poorly educated, to put all the money on them, to educate them, while the Europeans in France, Spain, or everywhere do not get that opportunity. And so...
what conclusion do you draw from the impact on Chancellor Merkel, particularly in the regional elections recently, because of the way it was handled? What has got to be done about the perception issue in order to find something which is a significant management solution across Europe?
Well, I believe simply the communication that was used in Germany was trying to pretend the internet didn't exist and people were still stupid and would only have one source of information.
Okay. Right, you've got one view here about perception, fear.
Exactly, and to bring some local flair on this, I'm Milan Nič from think tank CEPI, or GLOBSEC Policy Institute, as of this weekend. The elections are over here, and the Prime Minister Fico's right against migrants on fears and so on is also over. And his own government, that includes now party of František Šebej, that it's called Bridge, and it's preaching tolerance, is quietly preparing to welcome, to do relocations, if I read the government manifesto right. And my question is, to all audience, how will the same Prime Minister do the explanation job to his own electorates that he raided, that he mobilized against refugees, when until the end of the year we will have Syrians not on the border, on the Austrian side of the border, but also here in Bratislava, and to what extent we are ready to it. I think civil society is ready, and as part of the Slovak EU presidency, I think this government is going to do a quiet U-turn without explaining this to the voters.
So that's fascinating. What we have is a political decision which has to be taken to win an election or become the biggest party, but then taking a rather different view. Madam President, what's your view on that as you deal with politicians across Europe? How this can be handled? You've got to win elections, but then you've got to handle a massive humanitarian crisis.
I always look at politics or life in my own country. You know, if you're thinking of the next elections, you're only a politician. But if you're thinking of the next generations, then you're a statesperson. You're a leader. And we need to be leaders in this crisis. Part of these fears, let's be honest, are well-founded. Because people come preconditioned with certain customs, with certain beliefs, with certain value systems from countries such as Afghanistan, for instance. And I spent some time on the ground. In that country, the Ulema Council has proclaimed that, for instance, men are fundamental to the society and women are secondary. A lot of these people honestly come with the same belief. So we need education on both sides, on both the communities where the migrants will be integrated, well integrated, not assimilated, but integrated, and on the part of migrants themselves that can start in reception centers that are located outside of the European Union with first education and then later on, as somebody mentioned, job integration. Because giving people jobs where that's possible rather than social benefits will help them to accept the value systems. Honestly, if I can be a little bit unpolitically correct now, I am a little bit concerned about women's rights in Europe. If we create ghettos of immigrants who harbor this opinion that women are secondary in the society, that will be spreading through those ghettos. And that is one of the first tasks of the politicians. Do not create ghettos in our cities or anywhere in Europe.
František, let me just pick up on that point. Do you see that about to happen as well? That having won an election, there'll be a change of policy quietly?
Actually, I'm sorry to turn the whole attention to this small country because
Don't apologize. We're here and enjoying your hospitality.
Okay, but yes, I see the U-turn mentioned by Milan. Fortunately, I see it, and I'm convinced that this country can handle much larger number of people who need help. We are not exactly a poor country, and we can be more helpful, and we will be, I'm quite sure. But I would like to answer a gentleman over there who asked whether those who are using fear, I mean from political class, are just cynical manipulators or whether they are honest. Well, I think at least part of them are quite honest racists and people with prejudices. And number of those who are just cynically manipulating is a little bit smaller. And unfortunately, I see in some people the combination of both.
Angeliki and Roland, let me keep pressing you on this. You've just heard the likely pragmatic decision which is going to be taken here in a small country with a small challenge at the moment. But you're working in Berlin at the moment. We know the enormity of the challenge there before you go back to Athens. What's your assessment about how the politicians handle this? And after all, Chancellor Merkel is facing an election in the next 12 months. So how does Germany handle this? In Britain, there's the Brexit. We've seen what's happened in the Netherlands as well. These are very practical decisions and practical realities that have to be taken account of when it comes to handling the enormity of this migration, refugee, humanitarian issue.
No, absolutely. And I think, Germany initially decided to pave the way towards what it perceived would be a common European solution, and somewhere along the road they found themselves completely alone. And there was a feeling that they're carrying too much of the burden without any assistance, and that showed also internally in the domestic politics, especially towards the Chancellor. And it wasn't altogether a wrong assumption. Germany was very alone for a very long time. And we're starting to see a shift in the German policies, although it's not a radical one, I would say. They're reducing a little bit their open door policy. They're trying to manage the situation without coming right out against the initial policies that they put on the ground. But there is also recognition in Germany that Europe does have to take responsibility to an extent for a portion of these people, that there is a huge difference between an economic migrant and a refugee, that refugees can be a source, a beneficial source for Germany rather than a problem and not a crisis, and that at the end of the day they have a very long road ahead as regards integration, which requires access to the labor market and education. The problem is that there is also fatigue. The fatigue exists in the German public, correctly so to an extent, but also in the European public. You've had the Euro crisis, the Greek crisis, and now you have the refugee crisis. There is fatigue. There are too many crises, one following the other. So I think it's also difficult for politicians at some point to go forth before their public.
But we are where we are. They can't just simply shut the door and say, I'm coming back to work next week. This will go away, because it isn't going to go away. So I've got to keep pressing you. Where do we go? Where do the politicians go? Where do the civil servants go with their recommendations of what should be done both at national level and at European level? There's one question here. What European common communication for short-term asylum and foreign policy solutions? Picking up a couple of points already made about how do the political leaders communicate the realities and also the options open?
I don't think they communicate them very well. There have been, though, some efforts, going back to the communication for European asylum, there have been some efforts, some proposals put forth by the Commission last week, if I'm not mistaken, trying to create a common solution to the problem and a common European approach, which goes back to burden sharing.
But it's got to be sold to the public as well.
That's got to be sold to the public, and I don't think it can be sold to the public very easily
At all?
right now. Not right now. I think we're in a very fragile situation as regards public opinion.
Well, if, Roland, we have the open-ended Richter scale effect here, and that's really what Angeliki has just really confirmed about how to communicate this and how political leaders communicate it. What's your thought?
Well, exactly because of the existing fears, and in order to treat the refugees now in the European Union in a humane way, I think we need to limit the numbers. And in fact, you know, Angeliki is completely right. Angeliki is completely right. Germany has changed course. You know, it's some time ago that you could hear "refugees are welcome here" chanted in railway stations. Even "Wir schaffen das," "we can manage," is quite a while ago now. And now the deal with Turkey is all about reducing the numbers in order to cope properly with the problem in a humane way. These are two sides of the same coin. We need to see that. There is nothing xenophobic about wanting to know, wanting to have some control over your borders and wanting to know who comes to join you. You know, I think it's a completely normal, not a racist or xenophobic reflex. And having said that, yes, there has to be European burden sharing, but it can't be imposed with a sledgehammer. And yes, my country looked like it wanted to impose something with a sledgehammer, with what Viktor Orban called moral imperialism in September 2015. Now, many in Germany felt that was a completely unfair accusation, and you know, there's something to be said for both arguments. But the fact is that we have to somehow get together and come to a solution, and that will only work if we somehow recognize that we have different opinions, try to see where we find common ground, and not accuse the other side of living in the 19th century or in the 1930s or in the hippie dreams of the 70s. You know, because both sides of this argument use this kind of metaphors about characterizing the other side as being old-fashioned.
Let me just pick up with all four of you very quickly, if you can. Let's just pick up on the new deal with Turkey. The numbers going back are very small. Oxfam has asked for a moratorium on this fast-track process, not convinced it is working and is going to work at the scale that's needed. What's your collective view, Madam President?
Well, my view is certainly the way that the migrant flows were coming to Europe through land routes should be stopped, because that has in part caused the commotion and the fear among the European populations.
And the fast-track process.
And the fast-track process. Once the refugees are in the first safe country, in the country of first acceptance, in the first country of asylum, there is no need to push them further through countries. What has resulted in Croatia, for instance, is that in the Paris attacks, actually 4 persons passed through Croatian territory, because in one day, on October 25th, for instance, 11,500 people entered Croatia, and there were no physical possibilities to register all of them, let alone check the background of every single person.
But do you think Oxfam are right to ask for a moratorium? In other words, it's easy to invent.
But we need to do this in a slow and orderly manner, really determine who are the persons who are in need of international protection, who have the right to asylum, and be very clear on that. The messaging that you ask of all of us from the European Union and politicians, the people need to know, as I said, they're confused on the ground. And if we're not clear in our messaging, this will only spur further numbers, greater numbers of people to come to the European Union.
Angeliki, let me just pick up again on that issue of moratorium. You have the luxury of being an analyst, watching it, monitoring it, trying to chart it, see where it can go, see where it's going wrong. What do you think that even on this new deal, limited though it is, that really a moratorium is needed to work out if it can work?
I think the deal depends too much on the goodwill of the Turkish side to maintain it. Right now, the returns are taking place on the basis of the Greek-Turkish readmission agreement, so the EU is legally not involved in the returns, therefore it's also not liable, it's only Greece. Greece has been pushed to undertake fast-track processing for all asylum applications. We do not have the capacity for this, so we are getting ready to make mistakes. This is inevitable. It's going to happen. This means that people who probably should not be returned will end up being returned. I think there are legal issues with whether Turkey can be indeed a safe third country or a safe country for first asylum. And I think that it's a deal that doesn't also make a big difference.
Roland.
Just some numbers on how is the Turkey deal working so far. Since its entry into force on 20th of March, we've had 6,480 new migrants arriving in Greece. We had 326, so that's 5% of those turned back to Turkey. And we had 79 in turn for that, Syrians, flown to 2 or 3 EU member states in that time. That means the deal is not working at the moment. You know, there's huge gaps between these numbers. That doesn't mean it will never work. And it's true, Angeliki, that yes, we depend to a great deal on the goodwill of Mr. Erdogan. And
but can it work at the scale that's needed, given the enormity of the challenge that there is now for the European Union?
Only in connection with other solutions. And we all know very well that the reason why in Germany there is such a drop in numbers from over 10,000 per day last year, at the end of summer last year, to less than 300 at the moment, that's due to the closing of the Balkan route, not to the Turkey deal.
All right, does anyone want to come in just simply on this Turkey deal about whether it's working, whether it's not working? You've got experience of it, you're in the field, you're not in the field, you're a public servant. Please. Oksana, yes. From the EBRD.
Yes, Oksana Antenko from EBRD. My question is how sustainable...
On this particular issue, on Turkey.
On this particular issue, how sustainable is the EU-Turkey deal, given that it is linked to the visa-free, introduction of the visa-free and acceleration of the accession process? And it is very clear that the EU has to deliver in a very short period of time to Turkey, beyond the burden sharing, but also other political gestures. How much there is readiness after the Dutch referendum and recent developments to actually deliver the EU's part of the bargain?
Can I just ask you, does the EBRD have any evidence at the moment, early on?
Well, we are very much involved in supporting the employment in Turkey of the refugees, but you know, the issue which was raised before, the EU has to create opportunities for those employed people to export to the EU. So there has to be, more, bigger solutions of opening the European market for people who are employed, the refugees who are employed in both Lebanon, in Turkey, and in Jordan.
Anyone on the Turkey deal only, the Turkey deal here? Just because I'm picking up on what Victoria Grove has said from Cambridge University, that actually we need to have discussion based on evidence rather than just anecdote.
Well, we have no other option but to believe that this deal will work, because when you presented those numbers, please compare to the numbers that we had before this deal, when practically the hotspots were not functioning. We were talking at the EU level about new other permanent mechanisms, but in fact, we didn't have the hotspots really in a functioning way. And on the EU-Turkey deal, one thing that from Romanian point of view, okay, it's okay to close that route, but did you take into consideration that other possible routes will be opened through the Black Sea? Because I didn't see that in the Turkey deal, and this comes back to the another serious problem, that at the EU level we ought to see all the time quick fixes instead of a proper strategy of implementing real solutions complementary to the addressing the causes at the countries of origin and transition.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just picking up on Angeliki's phrase, we're getting ready to make more mistakes. On Turkey, the Turkey deal.
On Turkey, Ivan Lidarev, what makes you believe that actually Turkey wants the deal to succeed on the long run? At the end of the day, they can probably get more concessions from us just by kind of renegating on the deal, and they can constantly kind of move up and up the price.
Do you have a view on the deal yourself?
It's complex.
I'll write that down as a major contribution. Thank you. Down here, please, at the front. Is there anyone here from the Turkish government or representing a Turkish think tank who can contribute on this front? The view from Istanbul or Ankara or Izmir or anyone else? I'm giving everyone as much air as I can. Anyone here from Turkey who'd like to intervene, please? On the Turkey deal.
Yeah, I think this...
You're from the UAE?
I'm from UAE. I don't represent any Turkish perspective, but I am also criticizing this deal because you didn't put conditionality on the Turkish government, how they will deal with the refugee when you return them back to them. Because what they are doing, they are only sending them without any future for those. They're just pushing them towards ISIS. So this is my concern. This is incomplete deal.
All right, it's imperfect. Constantine, did you want? If you put up your hand, I think you're actually wanting to speak.
I just wanted to remind you about my question about the sustainability of the welfare state. That's
okay, well, it's written down here, so please
good.
don't try and
sorry about
don't
that.
bulldoze your way through. I'm working through a number of other issues. František, the issue of the Turkey deal.
Well, I want to remind all of us that actually before the huge wave of refugees started to move, the situation in refugee camps in general in Turkey and Jordan and so on deteriorated. And the World Food Bank signaled already that there is extreme shortage of resources. And actually the people who first run away from the war in Syria into Turkey, gradually their living conditions got worse and worse and worse, and then they started to move. And actually, at that time, the political leadership of European countries, of United States, simply didn't listen to the warnings. And therefore, I also believe that the deal with Turkey could work. It is just very slowly starting, but on the other hand, probably the Turks are right when they ask for more money and more resources, because yes, they have 2 million people living in refugee camps, and I don't know how many living in some kind of legal limbo outside of any camps. Yeah, plenty. And simply we have to do something to take care of those people who are not anymore in Syria, but are in neighboring countries, and to give them at least hope that they will live in a more or less acceptable life without needing to move to Europe. And therefore, I believe that the deal with Turkey, and not only with Turkey, is more than necessary.
All right, we've got half an hour to run. Let me move forward now. We had the Pope yesterday on Lesbos, and he made a number of important points. But he left that message of, we must now deal and respond to this with common humanity. When you have to look at the very pragmatic political options open to each of the 28 nations in the European Union particularly, how do you link, how do you somehow create a linkage between what the Pope says needs to be common humanity, but also the very practical political pressures inside the country? Is it really a Rubik's Cube, which simply can never have all the sides matched up? I put that to you as really a challenge. Is there a way where from here in Bratislava at 2 o'clock we can say, actually, there is a view that this circle can be squared? Any views here, Madam President?
Well, I'd like to go back to what I said in the beginning. Of course, we need to demonstrate, display our common humanity. Not just the European Union, but as I said, it's a global problem. The deal with Turkey is one of the quick fixes that will not fix the problem in the long term. But it's the necessary first step. And in Turkish defense, of course, they will use this deal to their advantage. But what we saw wrong about relaxing the visa system for Turkish citizens or aiding Turkey, who are actually taking care of so many refugees, and are doing that in the best term possible. What we need to do in order to ensure that common humanity is first and foremost look at the reception centers for refugees and provide the basic living conditions that correspond to human security. So not just absence of the threat of war, but really the conditions for healthcare, for education, and even to perhaps get jobs in the countries of first reception or elsewhere. When it comes to relocating to Europe, of course, it's a very complex issue. And I mentioned solidarity goes both ways or multiple ways. Yes, we would like to take in as many refugees as we can, but simply our absorption capacity, our integration capacity is very, very small because of the circumstances that Croatia, Slovakia, and other countries find ourselves in. So it's not about xenophobia. It's not about refusing these refugees because they're of Islamic religion. It's talking about economic migrants whom we cannot integrate because 60% of our own young people are unemployed. And for a complete integration, you really need to give people jobs. Now, secondly, again, this requires long-term solutions that will address the root causes of migrations from illiteracy and poverty to terrorism, extremism, climate change, etc. And this is how we can demonstrate, show our common humanity by not focusing only on the European continent, but let's look outside. Let's finally have an assertive common foreign and security policy and an assertive development aid policy, and let's start solving problems at their roots.
Angeliki, common humanity, how can it be done within the realities of cost, both humanitarian and hard euros?
Well, I think you can't have both of them 100%. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to be realistic and acknowledge that not everybody is going to get in, not everybody will be protected, not everybody will be able to be integrated. But I think you can find a middle ground between the two. Especially in Europe, you can have the common humanity and at the same time ensure security. And you can do that by establishing a common asylum system in Europe, guarding the external borders in a uniform way, ensuring that everybody is registered, have very clear distinctions between who is a refugee and who is an economic migrant, who can stay and who can go, establish good partnerships with third countries to facilitate returns in a humane manner, establish incentives with third countries to work with us in a constructive partnership, in a constructive relationship.
Do you see things moving in that direction?
There are some indication, especially as regards the foreign policy angle. There are some indications that this was where we are trying to go. Whether we will succeed, it's a completely different.
Okay, but what has to be done for that to be gripped as a viable option which is politically acceptable in every member state?
Well, especially as regards the foreign policy angle, I would say that the European Union has to accept that we have to offer genuine incentives to third countries. And that means we have to include in there legal migration options, because that's at the end what they want. And legal migration sounds like a huge challenge and terrifying to some people, but it's actually not. It's a very good way to establish secure transfer of people to the Union, both for refugees and for economic migrants, short-term training schemes, student schemes, visa schemes, circular migration schemes. You know who's coming, you know for how long, you know where they're going to stay. Everybody benefits. And we do have some of these legal instruments in place. We just have chosen not to use them so far.
All right, if any of you have got ideas on what Angeliki has just said, please, let's again put them into the mix. Roland, your thoughts about humanity.
This was so well said, both by the President and Angeliki. I really have very little to add to this, but maybe one point.
But can they both be achieved? A management of this with what the Pope talked about, with common humanity.
No, I think Rubik's Cube was a good expression. You know, it's not impossible, but it takes a long time. So we need to strive to bring these two things together. But we need to be realistic about our possibility to do so very fast. Just one point on safe havens, safe zones in the countries of origin or near the countries of origin. Something we haven't discussed yet, but something that has come up not only in Brussels, but also in national capitals, and that will come up much more in the time to come, is my prediction during this year, because we're going to see other routes being tried by refugees, and we need to rethink the question of military intervention, and it's anathema to so many member states of the European Union, but if it happens, it will be a coalition of the willing.
Okay, well, let's not go down that track. I think we aired that yesterday with NATO and with Sandy Vespa and so on. But František, what do you think about how you guarantee common humanity?
Well, I'm afraid the politicians are not fit to educate. Politicians are not fit to educate the rest of their people. They just represent them, and
I better get a response from a politician in the room.
No. But I feel that. Actually, the politicians are product of society, and unfortunately, that's one of the shortcomings of democracy. That actually, when you see the outcome of election, you just see the digital picture of let's say state of mind of people who voted, but. To reach something like common humanity is simply work for much broader spectrum of people, for opinion makers, journalists, intellectuals, writers, to try to educate the people around them. It's. I'm afraid most politicians just have one in mind: to get re-elected, and that is something which is in conflict with effort to try to change values in societies.
Is there any political figure here who
I don't want to be cynical, of course.
You're not being cynical, you're being realistic, I suspect. But would anyone like to come back on how, again, that circle can be squared? Maria? We're trying to find ways forward. That's what we're here to discuss, about what European response is, and if it comes down to the political classes.
I think it's a bit of a vicious circle. I think the politicians have the responsibility to explain to the people the real situation. Not everybody is politically educated or knows all the figure or has even the time to look at all the realities of situations on the ground. And I think we should discuss how about not bringing refugees, solving the problem in Syria so that we will not have any refugees.
Yeah, but we are where we are at the moment.
Yes, well, we can still solve it.
Andras Rats from Helsinki, originally from Hungary, sorry. The good news about Rubik Cube, do you know how much time does it take to complete Rubik Cube? 50 seconds.
Depends who you are, I think.
If you know the algorithm. No, there is an algorithm. There are actually more than one algorithm. The thing is about the willingness to learn the algorithm. We know what we should do. The question is about the willingness. It's not impossible at all. It depends on us. That's the good news about Rubik Cube. Thanks.
All right.
See, I'd like to take issue with that. I don't think that there's a perfect solution which is out there and we just have to discover it. That's the straight way to the kind of
help us discover
conflict we had. No, but I'm saying that there are different opinions and we've got to seek a compromise, and that's the best we can get in the European Union.
Please.
Hello, my name is Selim Koru. I'm from Turkey.
You are from Turkey. What do you think of the deal?
Well,
You've been hiding.
I didn't speak up before because I'm not familiar with the technicalities, with the discussions.
Well, it just means you get the microphone and you speak.
Well, right, but you raised the issue of humanity and...
No, but can you answer the question about Turkey? Sorry to put you on the spot, but about the deal. What do you think of the deal?
What do I think of the deal? I thought it made a lot of sense for Turkey. I mean, it made a lot of sense for a Turkish politician to make that deal, and it makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of Turkish voters, because, I mean, to be honest, the most important thing from the perspective of a Turkish voter is going to be visa-free travel. I mean, I had to get a visa to come here. What if next year I don't? That's going to be a big point of prestige for Turkish voters. It's also, Turkey also feels kind of left behind in this whole Syria thing, that the United States hasn't been there as much as it would like to be, that the Europeans have been sort of as icky about this whole thing as they have been.
Okay, thank you. Right, what about the other point you were going to make?
On humanity, what strikes me about this is that I travel to the border sometimes, and there's a lot of things I criticize about my government at this point, but one thing that has impressed me about Turkish people's natural reflexes towards this and the Turkish government's natural reflexes towards this is that, you know, it was natural that Turkey would help as much as it did, that it would contribute as freely as it has. And on the European side, what we've seen is debate, lots of debate, a lot of sort of difficult feelings. And it seems to me that if one's initial reflexes are any indicator, that the Europeans have failed on the humanity scale, and that the question that should be asked is, does that point to something troubling about the European Union, about the European project?
Do you really think they have failed? After all, if those numbers have come in, even if it's been an uncomfortable experience,
Well,
at least they are being embraced in some form or another.
Well, I said if initial reactions are an indicator. In terms of initial reactions, I don't want to say that the European Union has failed on the immigration issue. I don't think that. But some of the discussions are troubling.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Who else would like to come in right at the back, please? And Konstantin, I haven't forgotten, and Alan, I haven't forgotten your points either.
I think we need a solution which makes politicians stand somewhere where most of the people stand. And the problem in Europe right now is in most countries, the political discourse is completely binary. You either have politicians who pander to fear, or you have politicians who seem to say, well, we should just accept them, embrace them with all they represent. But most people are somewhere in the middle. They fear this unknown, this culturally different group of people. At the same time, they feel that we need to help some of them. And I think the problem is that there are very, very, very few politicians who stand somewhere here in the middle and who would be willing to say, look, it's our obligation to help those people who are running away from countries where they're threatened. But at the same time, we need to make sure that these people are properly integrated. We're going to make sure that they stick to our values. And if they break these values, we're going to deal with that in a very tough way. And I think that would really help to bring a lot of the population behind a solution that could be acceptable.
And Angeliki, do you believe that those issues that you've put on the table could conform to humanity and showing humanity in the way that the Pope was talking about?
Well, I do agree with some of the points made. Integration doesn't mean, integration is a two-way street to begin with, and you can be humane and at the same time ask the other person to accept your values and your system and the laws and, you know, the way a country is structured. So these are not contradictory, but my issue with this whole discussion around humanity is, and I do disagree to an extent with you, I do think that the Europeans, at least some of the Europeans, did show humanity in the beginning. You really can't fault the Germans or the Swedes, or even Denmark for the way they initially reacted, or the Austrians. How it progressed, it's a completely different manner. But initially, they did show humanity. But my issue with this discussion on humanity is that it's not actually a practical discussion. We can discuss humanity and values.
We're putting it on the agenda because the Pope put it on the agenda in your country yesterday.
Yes, but the Pope put it on the agenda because, you know, he's the Pope and he has to speak also about humanity. The Pope cannot turn around and say, you know, get your act together, which is essentially what he should have done, because this is not about, like I said, humanity. You can have leaders who might subscribe to the whole notion of humanity, who might very well have wanted to, I don't know, open the borders and receive everybody. That's not the question here. The question is, what can you do in practice to improve the lives of those who are here and the ones who are waiting to get to Europe and the ones who will never even make it to Europe, who are, for example, stranded in Syria, who are trapped in war zones and in conflict. So there you have the argument, yes, I need to be humane, but how can this humanity manifest in action? And that's policy.
Sorry, just one quick comment. I just resent the conversation, the debate on your values and our values. These are universal human values that we're talking about. So I think that we have the right to demand from anybody who comes to our shore, equally from our own citizens as well, to respect the right to life, to equality between people regardless of their ethnic, religious, or any other background, the right to work, the right to school, the right to education, etc. So let's not call them our values, because they really are universal values, and all people on this planet are entitled to them.
In the last 10 minutes, can I just move forward again on how those who are coming to Europe are received, how they're housed, and what is the medium to long term. We're about 50 to 60 kilometers away from Vienna, where the Treiskirchen refugee camp was for many years, for those who were leaving this part of the world on this side of the fence. And of course, many stayed there a long time. And we've had the Jordanian foreign minister as well, underscoring the enormity of the challenge there. And there's still the Bekaa refugee camp from the war back in the 70s, where you've got a third generation of Palestinians. How is this going to be handled, do you believe, in many countries? Not camps, but the areas in which people are, for the moment, collected. Are these going to become permanent and therefore significant challenges as well for governments, particularly if the numbers keep increasing? Angeliki?
That's the question we're having right now for Idomeni, for example. This is the issue. It's not an official camp. You have about 16,000 people by the last count that are stranded along the border, and they're waiting. They're hoping that the border will open, although they have been repeatedly told the border was still closed. So they're not in official reception facilities. They're not in refugee facilities, but they are in these semi-permanent, I would say, constructions, because unless they can be convinced to be moved into the official reception centers that have been set up for them, they will inevitably end up staying there. And we do have, like you said, the example of these becoming, in the long run, informal settlements for people. So we do have that case right now in Greece at Idomeni. We also have similar examples in other areas. I think it will have to do with how well the people communicate to the refugees the importance of being moved into official facilities where they can be sheltered, catered, receive first reception services. And of course, in the long run, if these people do apply for asylum and their asylum is accepted, then for the state to find alternative places for them to slowly be integrated and live as part and members of the society.
Madam President, have you now worked out what your middle to long-term plan will be? And that's a few weeks and months away, as opposed to years, about how you will handle these centers and what happens next.
In Croatia. Well, the centers are there. They temporarily closed. We had, I think, about 111 people who have been stranded in Croatia. They do not want to ask for asylum in Croatia. They want to proceed further on. They will be there, but as I said, I am strongly opposing land routes. Why is there a need for people to travel on foot? We're only supporting human trafficking industry. We're supporting illegal migrations, infiltration of potential troublemakers, whether they'd be religious extremists, etc., through these land routes. If we determine that the people have the right to settle in a certain country, then why not travel by air, for instance, or why not travel directly? If you take into account that a person who leaves Afghanistan has to pay on average about $5,000 to human traffickers to get to Western Europe, a whole family could travel for the same amount of money. So I don't see the need for these land routes. We need to secure the borders. I guess we will later on talk about closing of internal borders, Nik. I shouldn't be touching upon that right now, but we need to control the borders for the safety of migrants themselves. We don't want for the Mediterranean to be a big graveyard of people, for human traffickers to be able to move freely, okay. But we need to organize then transportation to the destinations in the European Union where people will go. Therefore, I don't see the need for further camps to become permanent in any of our countries.
We've got about 8 minutes to run. Let me go to Alan. I stopped you asking a very detailed question, but can you summarize it in 20 seconds? And Konstantin as well, because I said I'd come back to you. Okay. And I just want to put that on the agenda because Elena Kostoroleva from the University of Kent is talking about how to give jobs to refugees. How can that be reconciled with the reality of the lost generation of the jobless young people within the European Union?
Yeah, I mean, the essential point I was trying to get across is that we are the huge world's largest market with 500 million people, the richest, largest market. We have the deployment power of the single market. And surely, we create enterprise zones across the Maghreb, each with a trade deal for the enterprise zone for goods, services, and capital. You can use that as a lever to provide a basis for the refugees to be settled there. You enhance the tax base of those states. You create stability, and you provide a magnet for refugees to go there rather than enter the Union. it's humane, it's commercial, it enhances stability, it creates alliances. Surely that is a better way to approach a lot of this problem. It's not the entire solution by any means, but I think it's a significant part of the solution. And what I find here very strange, and very strange indeed, is that this is so much doom and gloom, when, as I say, we are enormously rich and enormously powerful. We need some strategy. We need to think about these measures internally and externally, but we can deal with this. And it doesn't involve having to go down a xenophobic route.
All right, it's not totally doom and gloom. There are some positive signs here. Konstantin, your point as well, please.
I just want to repeat that my question is, as someone who is not a European Union citizen, is whether one of the roads to integration is not just actually looking right now how to place 1 million people who most of them are definitely underqualified for any job in the EU, apart from probably the most primitive ones, into some kind of job in order for them then to become dissatisfied. Then actually, if Europe takes immigration seriously, and if it is a future, then probably that needs dismantlement of the European Union model of welfare state, of social state, in order to promote more free markets and for people to integrate better. I mean, if you wish, a bit more of an American model, that's what I said. I mean, it's going to be a bit sacrilegious what I'm going to say here, but that is a question.
So, Roland, we have two very critical issues raised about economic opportunity.
What I want to say is that not only for migrants, everyone will have to accept that.
Roland?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with Kostya. I think the basic difference, and this goes beyond refugees, this goes to the essence of migration itself, or immigration. Basic difference between Europe and the United States is precisely this. We have immigration to welfare in all too many cases. Not in all cases, but we have too much of it. Immigration to welfare, into unemployment, into receiving social benefits. In the US, you hardly have this. Whereas, I put it very, very bluntly. If you want to be a successful car salesman in the US, you have to shake women's hands, for one example. The fact that, and part of this is the multiculturalist illusions of the late 20th century in Europe, we have not paid enough attention to this problem. I'm very grateful to Madame President for bringing up that culture matters. And it's not a question of whether we dislike Islam or are xenophobic. It is just the recognition of a basic fact of humanity. And so this question of labor market and integration into jobs instead of welfare is extremely important. And one last sentence about Alan's proposal of just extending the single market to Morocco and so on. Yes, but this will not happen from today to tomorrow. Try negotiating that with the Union of Small and Medium Enterprises and the trade unions in the European Union. So. There are standards in the EU that make up the single market, which will either have to be flouted if you extend it to Morocco, or you have to somehow miraculously bring Morocco to... Yes.
Okay, well...
All right. Okay, anyway.
But we were talking earlier about
proposal.
Incentives to third countries, and that's at the root of this. Angeliki.
No, I absolutely agree. This is at the root of it. This is what would make a partnership constructive and almost equal. I mean, I'm not the expert to tell you how to go about this. You would need economists involved on this. But I also agree the negotiations would be difficult. The practicalities are difficult. It would take a very long time. It's a long-term solution. It's something that we should have been working on 10 years ago, so that 10 years down the road, we could start seeing some results. It's never too late, of course. We could even start tomorrow, but it's not going to immediately solve or address the problem. It will take a very long time.
František.
Actually, I see some other task also. The damage to European mind, the damage done by fear-mongering is already done, and we have to make quite a large effort to let's say to compensate it, to change the mind of people, to turn them back to basic feelings of humanity. But I think we cannot try to make something like you mentioned, to create outside of Europe some, let's say, townships, or it's not. I am afraid it's not very realistic. I understand fully what.
All right. All right, Alan. Okay.
Okay. But we probably have to keep more down to the earth with our ambitions, what to do about it.
All right, thank you, because we've got time pressures, so let me just go to Madam President. Well, I started this session by reminding where we last met about 6 months ago, and you were talking about it wasn't politically correct to talk about the scale of what was happening. Very quickly, what's your sense of how much the system, the leaderships, the 28 certainly, are gripping this now and are talking about these kind of things that we've been talking about in the last 90 minutes?
Well, certainly they have started to acknowledge, or we have started to acknowledge, what the real issues are, where the real problems are, because it was just a distraction to talk about the quota and to speak about the division of people at the time. We need to look at this as a long-term issue, that needs a long-term solution. I don't know how the four freedoms would work outside of the common market of the European Union, but certainly a stronger neighborhood policy, a lot more investment, development aid, as I said, in combination with diplomacy and defense activities, will need to be tackled. Right now, we're still afraid to send some of the messages that need to be sent in order to try to control the migration waves, and we're still afraid to tackle the real issues, as has been mentioned: stop the war in Syria, stop the war in Iraq. Let's work together towards bringing stability, and that in itself will help manage the migration waves, because everybody ultimately wants to stay in their own country, in their own home, and they want to contribute to the development of their own countries.
Let me thank the panel. Let me just ask you, I asked you to poll earlier about whether the European Union should reimpose border controls at the border, and you'll have seen what the result was. We actually polled this yesterday. A lot were undecided and moved against border controls. Has anyone shifted their view in the last hour and a half? Okay. Would you like to just poll again in that case? Can you use your app? Should the EU reimpose internal border controls to deal with the migrant crisis? It's always interesting to find out how a discussion like this impacts on those attending, to see if anything changes. There you are.
How depressing.
And that's what it was before. So it has shifted by about 10% against imposing border controls. And the undecided have become less undecided. So can I thank you all very much indeed. Please stay in your seats.